The silence of dawn broke only to the rhythmic creak of wood, and the slosh of water as Krath hauled the yoke across her shoulders, beginning her climb up the mountain path that had worn itself into her life like a groove carved by endless repetition. She was the last orc woman in the valley, and every morning she made this journey from the spring at the mountain's base to the small plot of land halfway up, where she tended her garden and kept her goats. The yoke bit into her shoulders through the thick leather pads she wore, and the 2 wooden buckets swayed with each step, water sloshing over the rims to darken the earth beneath her feet. Her green skin gleamed with the first sweat of effort even in the cool morning air, and her tusks caught the early light as she set her jaw against the familiar burn in her legs. The path was steep and rocky, winding through scrub pine and wild rosemary that released their scent when her skirts brushed against them. Krath had made this walk every day for 3 years, ever since her clan had been driven from the lowlands by human soldiers, and she had fled into these mountains alone. Her family was scattered to the winds or dead. She did not know which fate had claimed most of them, and the not knowing was its own particular kind of grief. She paused at the halfway point, setting the buckets down to ease the ache in her shoulders. The valley spread below her, patchwork fields and distant farmhouses sending up thin threads of smoke. Human lands. She had carved out her existence on the margins, on land too poor and steep for anyone else to want. And even so, she felt their eyes on her sometimes, when she descended to trade herbs and goat cheese for the few necessities she could not produce herself. Krath lifted the yoke again and continued upward. The sun was fully risen now, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Beautiful, she thought distantly, though beauty seemed a frivolous thing to notice when survival demanded so much. She did not see the man until she crested the final rise and nearly collided with him. He stood in the middle of the path, and for a frozen moment they simply stared at each other. He was human, lean and weathered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of creek stones. He wore rough homespun clothes and carried a pack on his back. In his hands was a length of wood and a carving knife, and shavings littered the ground at his feet like snow. Krath's heart hammered. Her fingers tightened on the yoke, calculating whether she could drop it and run, whether he was armed with more than that knife, whether he would raise an alarm and bring others. "I am not here to hurt you," he said quickly, as if reading her thoughts. His voice was rough from disuse but not unkind. "I have been watching you make this climb for 3 days now. That looks like hard work." She said nothing. Words felt dangerous. Any interaction with humans felt dangerous. He held up the wood in his hands. It was partially carved, she could see now, shaped into a curve. "I am making a yoke," he said. "A second one. I thought I could walk with you and help carry the water." The offer was so unexpected that Krath could only stare. "Why would you do that?" "Because it is hard work," he repeated, "and you do it alone." "I am orc," she said flatly, making it both statement and challenge. "I know." He met her eyes steadily. "I am Owen Jennings. I am living in the old shepherd's hut on the north face about a mile from your place." "I have been there for a week." She knew the hut. It had been abandoned for years, slowly falling into disrepair. "You are squatting, more or less." A wry smile touched his mouth. "Not so different from what you are doing, I would guess." It was true, and she could not argue it. Krath shifted her weight, uncertain. Every instinct screamed at her to be wary, to refuse whatever this was, to protect herself. But another part of her, smaller and more fragile, whispered that she was so tired of carrying everything alone. "I do not need help," she said, though even to her own ears it sounded less like conviction and more like habit. "Maybe not," Owen agreed. "But I am offering anyway. You can say no. I will finish this yoke and leave it on the path tomorrow morning, and if you want to use it, you can. If not, the wood will rot and feed the earth and no harm done." He stepped aside then, clearing the path for her. Krath walked past him, every muscle tense, half expecting a trick or a trap. But he simply stood there watching her go and then returned to his carving. She thought about him all through the day as she watered her garden and milked the goats and mended the fence that the wind had loosened. A human man, living alone in the mountains. That was strange in itself. Humans lived in groups, in villages and towns, surrounded by their own kind. They did not choose solitude, unless, like her, they had no choice. That night she lay awake in her small stone hut, listening to the wind move through the pines and wondering what it meant that he had been watching her. Wondering what it meant that he wanted to help. In the morning, true to his word, there was a yoke waiting at the fork in the path where it split toward the shepherd's hut. It was beautifully made, the wood smooth and well fitted, the rope handles wrapped in soft leather that would not chafe. Krath stood looking at it for a long time, her shadow stretching behind her in the early light. She could ignore it. She could walk past and continue as she always had. But her shoulders ached with the memory of 10,000 climbs, and her pride felt like a heavy and exhausting thing to carry in addition to the water. Krath picked up the yoke. She continued to the spring and filled her buckets, then added 2 more that she tied to the second yoke. The weight was familiar, but the balance was different, less centered. She experimented with holding it in front of her, but that was awkward. There was no way to make this work alone. Footsteps on the path made her turn. Owen approached with a nod of greeting, his own shoulders broad beneath his worn shirt. He said nothing, simply bent and lifted the second yoke, settling it across his shoulders with the ease of someone who knew physical labor. "This way?" he asked, gesturing up the mountain. Krath nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Together they began to climb. It was strange, having another person's presence beside her on this path she had walked alone for so long. Their footsteps fell into rhythm without discussion, both of them adjusting their pace to match. The water sloshed in its buckets, but less wildly than when she climbed alone. Shared weight meant steadier steps. They did not speak. Krath kept her attention on the path, on the placement of her feet, on anything but the man walking beside her. But she was aware of him in a way that made her skin prickle, hyper-conscious of his breathing, his movements, the space between them. When they reached her small homestead, Owen set down the buckets where she indicated, near the garden. He straightened, rolling his shoulders, and looked around at what she had built. The garden was thriving despite the poor soil, neat rows of vegetables and herbs bordered by stones she had hauled up from the stream. The goat pen was sturdy, the 3 animals healthy and calm. Her hut was small but well-maintained, the roof tight, the door straight on its hinges. "You have done good work here," he said quietly. The compliment made something in her chest tighten. "It is enough to survive. It is more than that." He met her eyes. "It is a home." She had not thought of it that way. It had been a refuge, a hiding place, a place to simply exist without being hunted. But home implied something warmer, something chosen rather than resigned to. "Thank you for your help," Krath said stiffly, unsure of the protocol. Did she owe him something now? Was there an expectation? Owen shook his head. "No debt. I will come again tomorrow if you want. Same time." He left before she could answer, hiking back down the path toward the shepherd's hut. Krath stood watching until he disappeared around the bend, then turned to the work of her day with her thoughts in turmoil. He came the next morning, and the morning after that. For a week, they made the climb together in silence, establishing a routine as natural as breathing. Owen carried half the water. They set it down. He left. The pattern was simple and undemanding, and Krath found herself relaxing into it incrementally, her wariness easing by degrees so small she barely noticed. On the 8th morning, Owen brought bread. "I made too much," he said, offering her half the loaf. "It will go stale if I do not share it." The lie was transparent but kind. Krath took the bread, still warm from baking, and the smell of it made her mouth water. She had not eaten wheat bread in months, subsisting on the coarse barley she could trade for and the vegetables from her garden. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. They ate at the spring while the buckets filled, sitting on the flat rocks that bordered the water. The bread was good, dense, and slightly sweet, and Krath ate slowly to make it last. "How did you come to be here?" Owen asked. "In these mountains, I mean." The question was careful, his tone neutral, leaving her room to refuse to answer. Krath considered doing just that, but the bread had softened something in her, or perhaps it was simply that a week of kindness had eroded her defenses. "My clan was driven out," she said. 3 years ago, the humans in the valley decided we were too close to their farms. They said we were stealing livestock, though we were not. They came with torches and soldiers." She did not tell him about the screaming, about her little brother's hand torn from hers in the chaos, about the smell of burning thatch and the sound of steel on flesh. Some memories were too raw to speak aloud. "I ran into the mountains," she continued. "I thought I would die here, but I found the spring and the land, and I survived." Owen was quiet for a moment, his expression grave. "I am sorry that happened to you." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "You did not wield the torches." "No," he agreed, "but I am human and humans did this. I am sorry for that." It was not the answer she expected. Most humans, in her experience, would have made excuses or blamed the orcs somehow, would have found a way to justify the violence. This simple acknowledgement of fault, of shared responsibility even without shared action, was unfamiliar. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting. "Why are you here alone?" Owen's jaw tightened slightly, and she knew she had touched a nerve. Fair was fair, though. She had shared her pain, it seemed only right that he share his. "I was a soldier," he said after a moment, "in the king's army. We were sent to clear orc settlements from the borderlands." He looked at her directly, not flinching from what he was confessing. "I did things I am not proud of. I followed orders I should have questioned, and one day I could not do it anymore. I walked away." "Desertion," Krath said. "Yes." "They will hang you if they find you." "Yes." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. They were both fugitives then, both surviving on the margins, both hiding from the world that had cast them out. "I did not kill children," Owen said, his voice rough. "I want you to know that. I drew some lines, but I burned homes. I scattered families. I caused the kind of suffering that happened to you." He swallowed hard. "That is why I am here, why I brought you the yoke. It does not make up for anything, but I had to do something. I could not just keep existing and pretending I had not been part of that machine." Krath studied him, this man who carried his guilt like stones in his pockets, weighing him down but never released. She should hate him. Everything in her history demanded it. But she found that what she felt was more complicated, layered, and difficult to name. "The yoke helps," she said finally. "The bread is good. These are not nothing." Something in Owen's expression eased slightly, though the weight did not fully lift. They finished eating and filled the buckets, and together they climbed the mountain as the sun painted gold across the valley below. The days accumulated into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Owen came every morning without fail, and they fell into comfortable rhythms beyond just carrying water. He helped her repair the goat pen when one of the posts rotted through. She showed him where the best wild herbs grew, the ones that brought good prices in trade. They shared meals sometimes, simple food made better by company. Krath found herself watching for him in the mornings, found herself disappointed on the rare occasions when she reached the spring before he did and had to wait. This was dangerous, she knew. Attachment was dangerous. Trusting a human was dangerous. But loneliness, she was discovering, had its own dangers, and the antidote he offered was potent. One morning in early autumn, she woke to find frost on the ground and her breath pluming in the air. Winter was coming, that inexorable truth of mountain life. She would need more firewood, more preserved food, more of everything to survive the months when the snow would trap her on the mountain. Owen was already at the spring when she arrived, stamping his feet against the cold. He had grown a beard over the past weeks, and it made him look older, more settled somehow. "I have been thinking," he said as they filled the buckets. "Winter will be hard up here. We should pool resources. I am a decent hunter, and I have some skill with carpentry. You have the goats and the garden, and you know these mountains better than I do. Together we would have a better chance." It made practical sense. Krath knew that. Two people could accomplish more than one, could watch each other's backs, could share the burden of survival. But it also meant commitment, meant trusting him not just for a morning's walk but for the long, dark months ahead. "You want to stay near my homestead?" she asked carefully. "The shepherd's hut is falling apart," Owen said. "I have patched it as best I can, but it will not hold against heavy snow. I could build a shelter near your place, something small. I would not intrude on your space. Or," Krath heard herself say, "you could help me expand my hut. Add another room. It would be warmer than building something new, and you could help with the work. We could share the space." The offer surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Owen's eyes widened slightly, and she saw him carefully considering the implications, making sure he understood what she was proposing. "I would not want to impose," he said slowly. "You would be useful," Krath replied, keeping her tone practical even as her heart beat faster. "And I would feel better not being alone when the wolves come down from the high peaks in deep winter." It was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she had grown accustomed to his presence, that the mornings they walked together had become the shape around which her days formed, that she was tired of being alone. Owen nodded slowly. "Then I accept. Thank you." They spent the next 3 weeks working on the expansion. Owen proved to be as skilled with carpentry as he had claimed, and together they built a second room onto the side of her hut, sharing the existing stone wall but giving them each their own space. They worked well together, Krath discovered. He anticipated what she needed, and she understood what he was trying to accomplish. They developed a shorthand of gestures and half-sentences that communicated more than lengthy explanations. At night, lying in her bed with only a wall between them, Krath found herself hyper-aware of every sound from his side of the hut. His breathing, the creak of his bed frame, the soft movements as he settled for sleep. It was intimate in a way that made her breath catch, even separated as they were. The first snow came in late autumn, a light dusting that melted by midday. But it was a warning, and they redoubled their efforts to prepare. Owen hunted and brought back 2 deer, and they spent long days preserving the meat, smoking and salting it. Krath harvested the last of the garden and showed Owen how to prepare the herbs for drying. They gathered firewood until they had a stack that reached the roof, and then they gathered more, one evening, working by firelight to repair a leather harness. Owen said, "Tell me about your family." Krath's hands stilled. She rarely thought about them directly anymore, had learned to keep those memories locked away where they could not ambush her. But Owen's voice was gentle, and the firelight was warm, and she was tired of carrying everything alone. "I had a mother, 2 brothers, a sister," she said quietly. "My father died when I was young, a hunting accident. My mother raised us alone and she was fierce. She taught us to be proud of who we were, to never bow to humans who thought themselves superior. She sounds strong. She was. Krath swallowed hard. When the soldiers came, she told us to run. She stayed behind to buy us time. I do not know what happened to her after that. Owen reached across the space between them and gently touched her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond accidental brushes while working, and the contact sent a shock through her system. His hand was warm, calloused from labor, and he squeezed her fingers gently before withdrawing. "I hope she survived," he said. "I hope she found safety somewhere." "I used to hope that too," Krath admitted. "Now I just hope she did not suffer." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind beginning to rise outside. Then Owen spoke again, his voice low. "I had a brother," he said. "Older than me. He was a soldier too. He died in one of the border conflicts, fighting orcs." He laughed bitterly. "My mother was so proud. She said he died honorably, serving the kingdom. But I saw his body when they brought it back. There was nothing honorable about it. He was just dead." "Is that why you enlisted?" Krath asked. "Partly. I thought I could make sense of his death somehow, could finish what he started. But war does not work that way. There is no sense to be made, no clean narratives. Just blood and mud and people dying for reasons they do not fully understand." "You left," Krath said. "That took courage." "Or cowardice." Owen shook his head. "I still do not know which." "Courage," Krath said firmly. "It is harder to walk away from what you know, even when it is wrong, than to keep following orders. You chose the harder path." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made the air feel thick. Krath's pulse quickened, and she saw her own awareness reflected in his eyes. This was more than friendship, more than simple companionship born of necessity. This was something else, something that frightened and compelled her in equal measure. "I should sleep," she said, standing abruptly. "Tomorrow we need to finish the shutters." "Yes," Owen agreed, though his eyes said he understood exactly what she was fleeing. "Good night, Krath. Good night." She retreated to her room and lay awake for a long time, listening to him settle in the next room, feeling the pull of him like gravity. The deep snows came in earnest as autumn turned to winter, locking them into their mountain homestead as effectively as prison walls. They fell into domestic routines that felt startlingly normal considering how abnormal their situation was. Owen chopped firewood and maintained the tools. Krath tended the goats and rationed their food stores. They cooked together, ate together, talked through the long dark evenings. Krath learned that Owen had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter, that he was patient with things that frustrated her, that he hummed while he worked, tuneless but content. Owen learned that she had a gift for storytelling, that she was fiercely competitive about the board game they played with stones and sticks, that she cried silently in her room sometimes when she thought he could not hear. On those nights, he would set a cup of hot tea outside her door and retreat to his own room, offering comfort without intrusion. They did not speak about the tension that stretched between them, the awareness that made every accidental touch feel electric, every shared glance weighted with meaning. But it was there, constant and undeniable, growing stronger as the winter deepened and their world narrowed to just the two of them. It was midwinter, the darkest part of the year, when the wolves came. Krath woke to the sound of the goats screaming, a terrible sound that brought her upright in instant panic. She grabbed her spear and burst from her room to find Owen already at the door, his hunting bow in hand. "Wolves," he said tersely. "At least 3, maybe more." They rushed out into the bitter cold, the snow knee-deep and still falling. The goat pen was chaos, the animals frantic, and Krath could see the darker shapes of wolves circling, looking for weakness in the fence. She did not think, just acted. Krath vaulted the fence and placed herself between the goats and the largest wolf, her spear leveled. The wolf snarled, lips peeling back from massive teeth, and she snarled back, showing her own tusks. An arrow hissed past her ear and took the wolf in the shoulder, making it yelp and stagger. Owen had climbed onto the fence for a better angle, and he was already knocking another arrow. The wolves circled, growling, weighing whether the fight was worth it. Krath jabbed at another wolf that got too close, catching it across the muzzle. It retreated with a yelp, and suddenly the pack decided this prey was too much trouble. They melted back into the snowy darkness, and within moments it was as if they had never been there, save for the tracks and the terrified bleating of the goats. Krath stood breathing hard, adrenaline making her shake. Owen dropped from the fence and crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. "Are you insane?" he demanded, his voice rough with fear. "You could have been killed. They would have killed the goats." "The goats are not worth your life. They are to me. They are all I have." "That is not true." The words burst from Owen with the force of something too long contained. "You have me. You have had me for months now, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Krath stared at him, her breath pluming in the cold air, snow clinging to her hair and eyelashes. His hands were warm on her shoulders even through the thick fabric of her sleeping tunic, and his eyes were fierce in the lamplight spilling from the open door. "Owen," she said, and his name came out like a prayer. He pulled her against him, and she went, her arms wrapping around his waist as his circled her shoulders. They stood like that in the snow, holding each other, and Krath felt something inside her that had been frozen for 3 long years begin to thaw. "I am Orc," she whispered against his chest. "I know. Your people hate mine, I know. This is impossible, I know." Owen's hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "I do not care. I am already a deserter and an exile. What is one more impossible thing?" Krath pulled back enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face made her heart stutter. Want and tenderness and something deeper, something that looked like the future. "I am scared," she admitted. "So am I." Owen's thumb brushed across her cheek, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "But I am more scared of losing this, of losing you." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, and he made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back. His lips were cold from the winter air but warmed quickly, and the kiss was everything she had not let herself imagine through all those long nights separated by a wall. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We should go inside before we freeze." "Yes," Krath agreed, but neither of them moved for another long moment, unwilling to break the spell. Eventually, the cold drove them back into the hut, and they checked on the goats, who had calmed now that the danger had passed. None were seriously injured, just frightened, and Krath soothed them with soft words and steady hands while Owen reinforced the fence where the wolves had tested it. Inside, they shed their snow-covered outer layers and stood awkwardly in the main room, suddenly uncertain now that the adrenaline had faded, and they were left with the reality of what had just passed between them. "I should let you sleep," Owen said, though he made no move toward his room. "Or you could stay," Krath said. "With me, just to sleep," she added quickly. "I do not want to be alone tonight." Relief and something warmer flooded Owen's expression. "I would like that." They lay down together in her narrow bed, and it was awkward at first, figuring out how to fit together, where to put hands and limbs. But eventually they settled, Krath's back against Owen's chest, his arm around her waist, fitting together like pieces that had always been meant to join. "Tell me something true," Krath murmured into the darkness. "I am falling in love with you. Owen said against her hair. "I think I have been since the first morning I walked with you up the mountain." Krath's breath caught. She turned in his arms so she could see his face, shadowed in the dim light of the banked fire. "That is terrifying." "Yes. I am falling in love with you too," she confessed, "and I do not know what to do with that." "Neither do I." Owen smiled slightly. "I suppose we figure it out together." "Together," Krath repeated, testing the weight of the word. It felt right in her mouth, felt like possibility. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Krath woke in the morning with Owen's warmth solid against her back, she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Hope. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of domestic happiness that Krath had never imagined she would experience. They still maintained their separate rooms for propriety's sake, but most nights they ended up in the same bed, seeking each other's warmth and comfort. They learned each other in the small ways that mattered. How Owen liked his tea brewed, how Krath needed silence first thing in the morning, the way they could communicate entire conversations with just a look. They talked about everything and nothing. Owen taught her a card game from his childhood, using a battered deck he had carried through his years as a soldier. Krath taught him to spin yarn from the goat's wool, laughing at his fumbling attempts. They kissed whenever the mood struck them, which was often, learning the taste and texture of each other with the slow thoroughness of people who had all the time in the world. But beneath the happiness was an undercurrent of unspoken questions. What would happen when spring came and the world opened up again? Could they continue to hide here forever? What future could they possibly build together when everything in their world said their love was forbidden? Krath tried not to think about it, tried to stay present in the perfect isolation of winter. But the questions lurked like wolves at the edges of her consciousness, waiting. Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow retreating in grudging inches, the ice on the spring breaking apart in ever larger chunks. The goats grew restless in their pen, eager for fresh grazing, and the first green shoots appeared in the garden plot, promising renewal. Owen and Krath stood together one morning in early spring, watching the valley below emerge from winter's grip. The path down the mountain was nearly clear now, passable with care. "I need to go down to the village," Krath said, "to trade for seeds and other supplies. I will come with you." She shook her head. "It is dangerous for you if anyone recognizes you as a deserter, and it is dangerous for you to go alone as an orc," Owen countered. "We go together or not at all." They argued about it for days, both stubborn, both scared. Finally, they compromised. They would go to the smallest village, the one on the far edge of the valley where Krath had occasionally traded before. They would keep their heads down, make their trades quickly, and leave. The day they set out was bright and clear, almost mockingly beautiful. Krath's stomach churned with anxiety as they descended the mountain, the yokes carrying goods to trade: goat cheese, dried herbs, spun wool. Owen walked beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers in reassurance. The village was a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads, maybe 30 people in total. They went to the general store, a ramshackle building run by an old woman named Mara, who had always been fair in her dealings with Krath. Mara looked up when they entered, her eyes going from Krath to Owen and back again, her expression unreadable. "Morning, Krath," she said carefully. "Been a while." "The winter was long," Krath replied, setting her basket on the counter. "I have goods to trade." They went through the negotiation, and Mara was fair as always, giving good prices for the cheese and herbs. But her eyes kept darting to Owen, questions clear in her gaze even if she did not voice them. They were almost done, Krath relaxing incrementally when the door banged open and 3 men entered. They were rough-looking, armed with knives at their belts, and they brought the smell of alcohol and trouble with them. "Well now," the largest one said, his eyes fixing on Krath. "An orc. What is a monster doing in a human village?" Krath's hand went to the knife at her own belt, but Owen stepped slightly in front of her, his posture deceptively relaxed. "We are just trading and leaving," he said evenly. "No trouble wanted." "I did not ask you," the man sneered. "I asked the monster." "She is not a monster," Owen said, his voice hardening. "She is a person, and she has as much right to trade here as anyone." The man's eyes narrowed, and he looked Owen up and down with fresh attention. "You defending an orc? What are you, some kind of traitor?" The word hung in the air like a blade, and Krath saw Owen tense. This was the moment, she realized. The moment where he could step away, disavow any connection to her, save himself. Owen did not step away. "Yes," he said clearly. "I am defending her. She is worth defending. And if you have a problem with that, you have a problem with me." The three men exchanged glances, and Krath saw them calculating odds, deciding whether this was worth a fight. She moved to stand beside Owen, presenting a united front, her hand firm on her knife hilt. "Stop it!" Mara's voice cracked like a whip from behind the counter. "All of you. I will not have fighting in my store. You three out, now, and do not come back until you can behave like civilized people." The men grumbled but obeyed, shooting dark looks at Krath and Owen as they left. When the door closed behind them, Mara sighed heavily. "You two are going to cause trouble," she said, but her tone was not entirely unkind. "People already talk about the orc woman living alone on the mountain. If they know a human man is with you, especially one who talks like an educated soldier, there will be questions, maybe worse than questions." "We will be careful," Owen said. Mara shook her head. "Careful may not be enough, but I wish you luck all the same. Here." She added an extra packet of seeds to their trade goods. "No charge. You will need all the help you can get." They thanked her and left quickly, but Krath could feel eyes on them as they crossed the village, could hear the whispers starting. By the time they reached the path back to the mountain, her shoulders were rigid with tension. They did not speak until they were well away from the village, climbing into the safety of the higher elevations. Then Owen stopped and turned to her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I am sorry," he said. "I made it worse, did I not?" "You stood up for me," Krath said, her voice thick. "No one has ever done that, not a human. I will always stand up for you." Owen's thumbs brushed across her cheeks. "Whatever comes." "They will not let us be," Krath said. "You know that. Humans do not accept this kind of thing, and if any orcs find out, they will consider me a traitor too. Then we will deal with it." Owen's voice was firm. "Together. I did not find you just to lose you because the world is too small-minded to accept what we have." They kissed there on the mountainside, and it tasted like defiance and promise. But Krath knew, deep in her bones, that trouble was coming. It arrived 2 weeks later in the form of soldiers. They came at dawn, 6 of them on horseback, wearing the king's colors. Krath spotted them from the garden where she was planting the new seeds, and her blood turned to ice. "Owen," she called, and he emerged from the hut, his eyes going to the approaching soldiers and his face going pale. "Get inside," he said urgently. "Hide. I will not leave you." "Krath, please. If they have come for me, there is no reason for you to be dragged into it." But it was already too late. The soldiers had spotted her, and she could see the way their expressions hardened, hands going to weapons. They saw an orc, and that was all the reason they needed. The soldiers reined in their horses at the edge of the homestead, and their leader, a grizzled man with sergeant's stripes, looked between Owen and Krath with cold assessment. "You are Owen Jennings," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Owen replied, stepping forward. "What do you want?" "You are wanted for desertion. The penalty is death." The sergeant's eyes flicked to Krath. And you are harboring an orc, which is violation of the settlement laws for this region. That is also a crime. She is not harboring me, Krath said, lifting her chin. I was here first. This is my land. Orcs cannot own land, the sergeant said flatly. Not in the king's territory. You are squatting illegally. The king's territory, Krath said bitterly. Funny how that keeps expanding to include places you never cared about before. Enough, the sergeant gestured to his men. Take them both. The deserter will stand trial. The orc can be removed to the camps. No. Owen moved to block the soldiers as they dismounted. She has done nothing wrong. She has been living here peacefully for years. Step aside, the sergeant ordered. I will not. Two soldiers grabbed Owen, wrestling him back. He fought, landing a solid punch that sent one soldier reeling, but there were too many. They forced him to his knees, and Krath saw them draw their swords. Everything slowed down. Krath saw the blade rising, saw Owen's eyes meet hers, saw her own reflection in the polished steel. She moved without thinking, pure instinct overriding fear. Krath grabbed her spear from where it leaned against the hut and threw herself forward, putting herself between Owen and the descending blade. The flat of the sword caught her across the ribs, driving the air from her lungs and sending her sprawling, but it deflected the killing blow. Stop. The sergeant's voice cracked out. Hold, the soldiers froze. Krath lay on the ground, gasping for air, her side a mass of pain. Owen was shouting something, struggling against the men who held him, but she could not make out the words over the ringing in her ears. The sergeant dismounted and walked over to where she lay. He looked down at her with an expression she could not read, then at Owen, then back at her. You took a blow meant for a human, he said slowly. For a deserter. I love him, Krath said, forcing the words out through her bruised ribs. I do not care what you call him. I love him. The sergeant was quiet for a long moment. His men stood uncertainly, waiting for orders. Owen still held between them. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold, beautiful and terrible. I was at the burning of the orc settlements, the sergeant said finally, his voice low. 3 years ago, I gave orders. I watched families scattered. I did what I was told because I thought it was right, that we were protecting our people. He shook his head slowly. But lately, I have been wondering if we are not just making more enemies, more pain. If maybe the problem is not orcs or humans, but people like me who cannot see past what we have been told to believe. He turned to his men. Let him go. Sir? One of the soldiers looked confused. I said let him go. The sergeant's voice was firm. We came here chasing a deserter and we found nothing. An empty shepherd's hut, a collapsed lean-to, no sign of anyone. Understood. The soldiers exchanged glances, but slowly they released Owen. He scrambled to Krath's side, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up. Why are you doing this? Owen asked the sergeant, his voice rough with confusion and hope. Because I am tired, the sergeant said simply. Tired of enforcing laws that make good people into criminals. Tired of watching fear turn us into monsters. He looked at Krath. You protected him. You took a blow for him. That is more loyalty than I have seen from most soldiers who serve for pay and glory. Who am I to call that wrong? He remounted his horse, and his men did the same. We were never here, he said. But you should know that others may not be as willing to look the other way. If I were you, I would think about moving deeper into the mountains, somewhere truly remote, at least until the political winds change. Thank you, Owen said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. The sergeant nodded once, then turned his horse and led his men back down the mountain. They watched until the soldiers disappeared from view, not quite believing they were truly safe. Owen turned to Krath, his hands running over her carefully, checking for serious injury. You could have been killed. Why did you do that? You would have done the same for me, Krath said, wincing as his fingers found the bruise blooming across her ribs. We protect each other. That is what love is. You are going to have a spectacular bruise. I have had worse. Owen pulled her carefully against him, mindful of her injury, and they sat like that in the morning sun, holding each other and marveling at the fact that they were alive. We should listen to him, Krath said after a while. Move deeper into the mountains. Find a place where no one will find us. Is that what you want? Owen asked. To keep hiding, Krath thought about it. Part of her rebelled against the idea of being driven from yet another home, of letting fear dictate where she could exist. But another part, the part that was learning to choose her battles, knew that survival sometimes meant retreat. I want to be with you, she said simply. Everything else is negotiable. They spent the next month searching the high mountains, ranging further than Krath had ever gone, looking for the perfect spot. They found it in a high valley, sheltered and remote, with a stream and good soil and meadows for the goats. It was beautiful in a wild way, untouched and ancient. They built a new home there together, larger than the old one, with 2 rooms that became one on the nights they wanted closeness and separation when they needed space. They brought the goats and their tools and everything they could carry. It was hard work starting over, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. Summer turned to autumn, and autumn toward winter again. On a cool evening with the first hint of frost in the air, Owen took Krath's hand and led her to the meadow above their home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, and the air smelled of pine and coming snow. I have been thinking, Owen said, suddenly nervous in a way she rarely saw him. About the future, about us. What about us? Krath asked, though her heart had begun to beat faster. Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a carved wooden ring. It was beautiful work, the wood polished smooth, with a pattern of leaves worked into the surface. I do not have gold or jewels, he said. I have nothing to offer you but myself and this ring I made, but I love you, Krath. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you laugh when you think no one can hear. I love the life we have built together, and I want to build all the rest of our lives together too. He took a breath. Will you marry me? Krath stared at the ring, at his hopeful, nervous face, and felt tears prick her eyes. You know we cannot marry, not legally. No one would recognize it. I do not care about legal, Owen said. I care about us. We can make our own promises, our own vows. It does not matter if the world recognizes it. We will know. Yes, Krath said, the word bursting from her like a sob. Yes, I will marry you. Owen slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, and Krath felt a joy so fierce it almost hurt. They married themselves a week later. Speaking vows they wrote together under the open sky with no witnesses but the mountains and the wind. They promised to protect each other, to share their burdens, to walk together through whatever came. Krath wove flowers into her hair, and Owen wore his best shirt, and they held hands as they spoke words that needed no official sanction to be true. That night they made love for the first time, learning each other with gentle hands and patience, discovering how to bring pleasure, how to move together. It was awkward and beautiful and perfect in its imperfection, and afterward they lay tangled together, Krath's head on Owen's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. My wife, Owen said, testing the word. My husband, Krath replied, and smiled at how right it sounded. Winter came and wrapped them in white silence again, but this winter was different. They were not just 2 people hiding from the world. They were married, committed, building a future even in the face of impossible odds. Spring brought unexpected visitors. Krath was tending the garden when she heard the voices, multiple people speaking in the Orcish tongue. Her head snapped up, and she saw them emerging from the tree line. 5 orcs, travel worn and weary, with the look of refugees. Owen was out hunting, and Krath was alone. She stood slowly, her hand going to her knife, uncertain if these were friends or threats. The lead orc was an older woman, her tusks yellowed with age, her green skin weathered. She stopped at the edge of the homestead and raised her hands, showing them empty. "Peace, sister," she called in Orcish. "We mean no harm. We saw the smoke from your fire and hope to find shelter. We have been traveling for weeks." Krath answered in the same language, rusty from disuse. "Where do you come from?" "The southern settlements. They were burned out a month ago. We are all that is left of our clan." The woman's expression was haunted. "We have been looking for a place to survive, but everywhere humans drive us away." Krath made a decision that she knew might change everything. "You can stay. For a little while at least, until you are rested and have supplies for the next part of your journey." The refugees came forward, grateful and exhausted. There were 5 of them. The older woman, whose name was Grelda, 2 young men who were brothers, and a mother with a small child. They looked at Krath's homestead with wonder, at the thriving garden and sturdy home. "You have done well here," Grelda said. "I am impressed. It is rare to see an orc prosper in human lands." "I had help," Krath admitted. "My husband, your mate, is orc." Grelda looked around, and Krath saw the exact moment when she spotted Owen's clearly human-sized clothing hanging on the line, the tools that were built for human hands. "My husband is human," Krath said, lifting her chin against the judgment she expected. The silence that followed was heavy. The 2 young men exchanged disgusted looks, and the mother pulled her child closer as if proximity to a human lover might contaminate him. "You betrayed your own kind," one of the young men spat. "Lay with the enemy." "I fell in love," Krath corrected coldly. "There is no betrayal in that." "How can you say that after what they did to us?" The young man gestured at his companions. "We lost everything to human violence, and you invite one into your bed." "Not all humans are the same," Krath said, her voice hard. "Just like not all orcs are the same. My husband fought for me, protected me, chose me over his own safety. That is more than many would do." "Where is this human?" Grelda asked, her tone careful. "Hunting. He will be back before dark." Krath met the old woman's eyes steadily. "And when he returns, you will treat him with respect, or you will leave. I will not have him insulted in his own home." Grelda studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood. We are grateful for your hospitality, and we will honor your rules." The 2 young men looked ready to argue, but Grelda shot them a quelling look, and they subsided into sullen silence. Krath showed them where they could camp near the stream, gave them food from her stores, and tried not to worry about what would happen when Owen returned. She trusted him, trusted his ability to read situations and respond appropriately. But she also knew how much danger this represented, how easily it could turn violent. Owen returned as the sun was setting, a deer across his shoulders. Krath met him at the edge of the clearing and quickly explained the situation in low tones. "Orc refugees," he repeated, his expression growing serious. "How many?" "5. They have been through a lot. They are frightened and angry, and some of them hate humans." "With good reason," Owen said quietly. "Given what humans have done." He squared his shoulders. "Let us go meet them." They walked together to where the refugees had made camp. The orcs looked up as they approached, and Krath saw the young men's hands go to their weapons. But Grelda stood and placed herself between her people and the approaching couple, a clear signal that violence was not the plan. "I am Owen," he said, speaking slowly and clearly in the common tongue. "This is my home, and you are welcome here as long as you treat my wife and me with respect." "You speak as if you have a right to make demands," one of the young men said in accented common speech. I speak as someone offering you food and shelter, Owen replied evenly. You are free to refuse and continue your journey if you prefer. Enough, Karn, Grelda said sharply, then turned to Owen. We are grateful for your hospitality. We will cause no trouble. That first night was tense. The refugees kept to themselves, and Krath and Owen retreated to their home, hyper-aware of the strangers on their land. They lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the camp, wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. But in the morning, when Krath brought food to the refugees, she found the mother, whose name was Elsa, crying quietly while her child slept. Krath sat beside her, and eventually Elsa began to talk, spilling out the story of the burning, of watching her husband die, of running through the night with her child in her arms. I do not know what to do, Elsa confessed. Where to go, how to keep him safe. Everywhere is death and fire. I know, Krath said, and she did. She remembered her own flight, her own terror. But you survived, that counts for something. How do you do it? Elsa asked. How do you live here knowing humans could come at any time, knowing that any day could be your last? I do not live in fear of what might happen, Krath said. I live in the reality of what is. And what is that I have a home and a husband who loves me and enough to eat. That is more than many have. Elsa looked at her, really looked at her, and something in her expression shifted. The others say you are a traitor for loving a human, but maybe you are just brave. Or foolish, Krath said with a wry smile. I am not sure there is much difference. Over the next few days, the tension slowly eased. Owen proved himself through his actions, sharing his hunting catches, helping to repair the refugees' travel gear, never demanding anything in return. The mother and her child warmed to him first, the little boy charmed by Owen's stories and woodcarving. Grelda watched everything with sharp eyes, judgment withheld but clearly forming. The two young men, Karn and his brother Doc, remained hostile. They muttered in Orcish when they thought Krath could not hear, ugly words about betrayal and corruption. She ignored them, but she saw how it wore on Owen, the constant weight of their hatred. It came to a head a week into the refugees' stay. Krath was working in the garden when she heard shouting. She ran toward the sound and found Owen and Karn facing each other, both tense, Doc circling around to flank. What happened? Krath demanded in Orcish. He insulted you, Owen said tightly, his eyes never leaving Karn. Said things I will not repeat. Words are just wind, Krath said, trying to defuse the situation. They do not matter. They matter to me. Owen's voice was hard. I will not stand here and let him call my wife those things. Your wife is a whore who spreads her legs for monsters who killed her own people, Karn spat, and Owen moved. He was fast, faster than the young orc expected, and his fist connected with Karn's jaw with a crack that echoed across the clearing. Karn staggered back and Doc lunged forward, but Krath was already there, her knife out, placing herself between them. Enough, she roared, and her voice carried the authority of years of survival, of hard-won strength. All of you stop, they froze. Krath looked at each of them in turn, her eyes blazing. You think I am a traitor, she said to Karn. You think I betrayed my people by loving a human. Let me tell you something. My people are dead. My clan is scattered. I survived alone for 3 years, and in all that time, no orc came to help me. No orc offered me comfort or aid. But this human, she gestured at Owen, this human carved a yoke and walked with me. He shared his food and his home. He stood between me and soldiers who would have killed me. He chose me over safety, over his own kind, over everything. So you tell me, who is the betrayer? The one who found love in unexpected places, or the ones who judge without understanding? The silence that followed was absolute. Karn touched his jaw, which was already swelling, and something like shame flickered in his eyes. "We have all lost so much," Grelda said quietly. "Our homes, our families, our way of life. But we cannot let that loss make us into the kind of people who cannot see goodness when it is in front of us. This human has shown us more kindness than many of our own kind would have." She looked at Karn and Doc. "You will apologize, or you will leave. I will not have you destroy the hospitality we have been given." Karn looked at his brother, then at Owen, and finally at Krath. "I am sorry," he said grudgingly. "My words were wrong. I am angry at the world and I took it out on you. That was not fair." Owen nodded acceptance, though his jaw was still tight. Apology accepted. The tension broke and people began to disperse. But that evening Karn approached Owen where he sat by the fire, sharpening his hunting knife. "Can I ask you something?" Karn said awkwardly. "You can ask." "Why do you love her? I am not trying to insult. I genuinely want to understand." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "At first, I did not think about it in terms of love. I just saw someone carrying a heavy burden alone and I thought I could help. Then I got to know her. Her strength, her resilience, the way she never gave up even when she had every reason to. The way she laughs, the way she thinks, the thousand small things that make her who she is. And somewhere in there, helping turned to friendship, and friendship turned to love." He looked at Karn directly. "She is my wife not because she is Orc or despite her being Orc. She is my wife because she is Krath, and Krath is extraordinary." Karn was quiet, absorbing this. "It is hard for me to see past what humans have done. My father died in a human attack. My sister was taken, and I do not know if she lives." "I am sorry for your loss," Owen said, and meant it. "I cannot undo what others of my kind have done. All I can do is try to be better, to choose a different path." "Maybe that is enough," Karn said slowly. "Maybe that is all anyone can do." The next morning, the refugees prepared to leave. They had rested, resupplied, and decided to push further north, where rumors said there were Orc communities living free. Grelda clasped Krath's hands in farewell. "You have given us more than food and shelter," the old woman said. "You have given us hope. Hope that the world might be more complicated than we thought, that there might be room for different kinds of love and life. Thank you for that. Travel safely," Krath said. "And if you find that free community, remember us. We may come looking for it someday." "You would be welcome," Grelda assured her. Even Karn and Doc said polite farewells, if not warm ones, and then the refugees were gone, disappearing into the forest, leaving Krath and Owen alone once more. "That was intense," Owen said, watching them go. "Yes." Krath leaned against him, taking comfort in his solidity. "But good, I think, to be reminded that there are others out there, still surviving, still trying. And now we know that if we ever need to, there might be a place for us, a community that would accept us both." It was a nice thought, even if Krath was not ready to leave their home just yet. They had built something here, something that felt permanent and real, and she was not ready to give it up. The seasons turned. Summer came hot and bright, and Krath discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, an accumulation of small changes she initially dismissed. But eventually the truth was undeniable, and she sat Owen down one evening to tell him. "I am carrying a child," she said, and watched his face transform. "A child," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "Yes," Krath was surprised to find she was trembling. "I am scared." Owen pulled her close. "So am I, but also happy. So happy." They cried together, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. A child, half orc and half human, born of a love that should not exist according to the world's rules. It seemed impossible and miraculous in equal measure. "Will it be safe?" Krath asked. "Bringing a child into this world, this life? I do not know," Owen admitted. but we will do everything we can to make sure it is. We will protect our child the way we protect each other. What will they be? Krath wondered. Will they look more orc or more human? Does it matter? To us, no. But to the world, yes. The world will judge them no matter what. Then we will teach them to be strong, Owen said firmly. To be proud of who they are, all of who they are. We will teach them that love is not weakness but the greatest strength. Through the months of her pregnancy, Owen was attentive to the point of hovering, constantly worried that she was doing too much, carrying too much. Krath tolerated it with amused patience, knowing it came from love even when it was annoying. Her body changed, her belly swelling, and she marveled at the life growing inside her. She felt the first kicks on a day in early autumn, and she grabbed Owen's hand, pressing it to her stomach so he could feel it too. His face went soft with wonder, and he spent the rest of the evening talking to her belly, telling their child stories of the world it would soon join. Winter was approaching when Krath's water broke. Owen had prepared as best he could, reading every resource they had on childbirth, gathering supplies, but nothing truly prepared them for the reality. The labor was long and difficult. Krath endured it with gritted teeth, her strength tested to its limits. Owen stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. When she screamed, he did not flinch. When she squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt, he did not pull away. The baby came with the dawn, a tiny squalling thing that the midwife would have called impossibility. But they held their child, their son, and nothing about him felt impossible. He had Krath's green-tinted skin, though paler, and small nubs on his jaw that might become tusks or might not. His ears were slightly pointed, his eyes human-shaped but orc green. He was beautiful and perfect and entirely theirs. What should we name him? Krath asked, exhausted and euphoric. I was thinking, Owen said softly. What about a wren? It is close to my name but its own thing. Like he will be his own person, not just a reflection of us. Iren, Krath tested the name. I like it. They introduced Iren to the world in the quiet of their mountain home with only the trees and sky as witnesses. He was a good baby, strong lungs and a healthy appetite, and Krath fell in love with him in a way that was different from her love for Owen, but no less profound. Watching Owen with their son made Krath fall in love with her husband all over again. He was gentle and patient, learning how to soothe Iren when he cried, how to change his swaddling, how to rock him to sleep. This man who had been a soldier, who had wielded weapons and followed orders to hurt, was so tender with their tiny child that it made her throat tight. You are a good father, she told him one night as he held their sleeping son. I am trying, Owen said. I want to be better than my own father was. I want Iren to know he is loved every day of his life. He will, Krath promised. We will make sure of it. The winter passed in a haze of sleepless nights and small miracles. Iren grew and changed daily, his personality emerging. He was curious and fearless, always reaching for things beyond his grasp, always eager to explore. As the weather warmed and spring arrived, they took him outside, showing him the garden, the goats, the mountains that surrounded their home. This is your home, Krath told him, even though he was too young to understand. These mountains, this valley, you belong here. Never forget that. One afternoon in early summer, when Iren was just learning to sit up on his own, Krath looked up from the garden to see figures approaching. Her heart leapt to her throat, old fear rising, but then she recognized Grelda's distinctive walk. The old orc woman was not alone. With her were perhaps 20 orcs, all ages, all looking travel-worn but hopeful, and mixed among them were a handful of humans. Grelda, Krath called, hurrying forward. What is this? A new beginning, Grelda said with a tired smile. We found a valley in the high mountains, unclaimed and perfect for settlement. We are building a community there, a place where anyone who has been cast out can find refuge, orc, human, or anything in between. Her eyes went to Iren, who Owen had scooped up at the first sign of strangers. A place where children like yours can grow up without having to choose between their heritages. You came to invite us, Krath said, understanding. Yes, we remembered what you said about how your husband carved a second yoke and walked with you. About how love can cross any boundary if we let it. We want to build a place where that love is celebrated, not hidden. Grelda looked around at the homestead. You have built something good here, but would it not be even better if you were not alone? If Iren could grow up with other children, if you could be part of a community? Krath looked at Owen, a wordless question passing between them. This was a huge decision, to leave the place they had built together, the home they knew. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to be part of something larger than just their survival. Can we see it? Owen asked. This new settlement, of course, Grelda said. We came this way specifically to bring you. The journey is about 3 days, but we can take it slow with the baby. They talked late into the night, learning about the settlement, the people who had gathered there, the rules they were establishing. It was not perfect, Grelda admitted. There were still tensions, still prejudices to overcome. But it was a start, an attempt to build something different. In the morning, Krath and Owen made their decision. They would go, would see this new place and judge for themselves if it could be home. If it was not right, they could always return to their mountain. They packed carefully, taking essentials but leaving much behind, ready to travel light. The goats they gave to a nearby farmer who had always been kind in trades, explaining they were going on a long journey. The man asked no questions, just accepted the goats with a nod of understanding. The journey to the settlement was everything Grelda had promised and more. They traveled through wild country, seeing parts of the mountains Krath had never explored. Iren was endlessly fascinated by everything, his wide green eyes taking it all in. The group traveled slowly, accounting for the young and the injured, but there was a sense of purpose that made even the difficult stretches bearable. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and looked down into a wide mountain valley. Smoke rose from multiple campfires, and Krath could see the beginnings of structures, gardens being planted, people working together. It was rough and new, but there was an energy to it, a feeling of possibility. They descended into the valley, and people came to greet them. Orcs and humans mixed together, some couples like Krath and Owen, others simply refugees who had chosen to reject the hatred of their respective cultures. Children ran around, playing together without regard for the color of their skin or the shape of their ears. What do you think? Grelda asked as they stood overlooking the settlement. I think, Krath said slowly, that this is what the future looks like if we are brave enough to build it. Are you? Grelda pressed. Brave enough, Krath looked at Owen, at their son in his arms, at the people working together below. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the terrified refugee on a mountain to a woman with a family and a future. Yes, she said firmly, we are. They settled into the new community, and it was not easy. There were disagreements and cultural clashes, moments of tension when old prejudices reared their heads. But there was also laughter and cooperation, friendships forming across species lines, a genuine attempt to build something better. Owen and Krath built a new home, larger than their mountain hut, with the help of neighbors. They planted a garden and found their place in the community's rhythms. Owen taught hunting and woodworking. Krath taught herb lore and goat husbandry. Iren grew surrounded by other children, learning to navigate a world where his mixed heritage was not a source of shame, but simply who he was. One evening, years after they had joined the settlement, Krath and Owen sat outside their home watching the sunset. Irene played nearby with a group of friends, his laughter bright in the cooling air. The settlement had grown, becoming more permanent, more real with each passing season. "You ever regret it?" Krath asked. "Leaving your old life, becoming an outcast, all of it?" Owen considered the question, really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "I regret what I did before I met you, the part I played in causing pain. But leaving, finding you, building this life, that is the best thing I ever did. Even though it was hard, especially because it was hard." Owen took her hand, his thumb brushing across the wooden ring she still wore, now polished smooth by years of wear. The easy path was staying a soldier, following orders, never questioning. The hard path was walking away, carving that second yoke, choosing love over fear. But the hard path led here, to you, to our son, to this community. So no regrets. Krath leaned against him, fitting into the space beside him that had become so familiar over the years. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son play, watching the community they had helped build go about its evening routines. Smoke rose from cooking fires. People called greetings to each other. Someone was singing, the words blending orc and human melodies into something new. It was not perfect. It was not easy. But it was theirs, built one day at a time, one act of courage at a time, starting with the simple choice to carry water together up a mountain. And that, Krath thought as the stars began to appear overhead, was more than enough. Years continued to pass, and the settlement thrived in ways that seemed impossible in those early days. Irene grew into a strong young man, proud of both halves of his heritage, and eventually he fell in love with a girl who was fully human. Their wedding was a celebration that brought the entire community together, a symbol of how far they had come. More children came to Krath and Owen, two daughters who had their father's laugh and their mother's determination. The family grew, and so did the community around them, until it was less a refuge and more a true town, with trade connections to the outside world, with recognition if not always acceptance from the neighboring human settlements. Krath never forgot those early days on the mountain, alone and struggling, when survival was all she dared hope for. But she also never forgot the morning Owen appeared on the path with a half-carved yoke and an offer of help. That simple act of kindness had changed everything, had set in motion a chain of events that led to this future she lived now. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, she and Owen would walk to the top of the ridge that overlooked the valley, just the two of them, and remember. They would talk about that first climb together, how uncertain and strange it had felt, how neither of them could have imagined where it would lead. "You saved me," Krath said during one such walk, her hair now streaked with silver, her green skin showing the fine lines of age. "We saved each other," Owen corrected, his own hair gone mostly gray. "That is how love works, I think. It is not one person rescuing another. It is two people choosing to walk the hard path together, carrying each other's burdens, building something neither could build alone." "Philosopher now, are you?" Krath teased, but her eyes were soft. "I learned from the best," Owen said, pulling her close. They stood there as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the world in gold and rose, the same colors that had greeted them on 1,000 mornings over the years. Below them, the valley was waking up, their family and their community beginning another day. And Krath felt, as she had felt so many times since Owen walked into her life, that rare and precious thing, contentment. The journey from that first dawn, hauling water alone up the mountain, to this moment had been long and difficult. There had been pain and fear, challenges that seemed insurmountable, moments when giving up would have been easier. But they had persevered together, and in doing so they had not just built a life but had helped build a future where others like them could love without hiding, could exist without fear. It was not perfection. The world beyond their valley was still full of prejudice and hatred, still saw their love as wrong. But here, in this place they had helped create, there was acceptance. There was hope. There was proof that another way was possible. And it had all started with a man who saw a woman carrying a heavy burden alone and decided to carve a second yoke and walk with her. That simple choice, that act of compassion and connection, had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have predicted, touching lives and changing futures. It reminded Krath every day that small acts of kindness could be revolutionary, that love was the most powerful force for change in a world too often ruled by fear. As they walked back down to the valley, hand in hand, Krath looked at Owen and saw not just her husband but her partner in every sense of the word. The person who had walked beside her through impossible terrain, who had carried half the weight when she could not carry it all, who had chosen her again and again even when the world said it was wrong. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For the yoke. For walking with me. For everything." Owen smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me enough to share the burden, for building this life with me." They kissed there on the path, a kiss that held decades of love and partnership, and then continued down to the valley where their family waited, where their community thrived, where the future they had fought for was becoming reality one day at a time. The story of the orc woman who hauled water up the mountain alone and the human man who carved a second yoke to walk with her became legend in the community. Parents told it to their children as a lesson about compassion and courage. Young people in love cited it as proof that love could overcome any obstacle. And as the years turned to decades, it took on the quality of myth, a founding story for a people who had chosen to reject hatred in favor of hope. But for Krath and Owen, it was never myth. It was simply their truth, the story of how they found each other in a world that said they should be enemies, and how they chose love over fear. It was the story of every morning they woke up and chose each other again. It was the story of a burden shared becoming lighter, of a journey walked together becoming less lonely. And in the end, that was all any love story really was. Two people choosing to walk the same path, to carry each other's burdens, to face the world side by side. The details might change, but that core truth remained constant. On the last morning they climbed their ridge together, both of them ancient now. Their children and grandchildren carrying on the work they had started, they sat and watched the sunrise one final time. Krath's hand found Owen's automatically, fingers intertwining as they had 10,000 times before. "No regrets?" she asked, echoing that conversation from so many years ago. "Not a single one," Owen said firmly. "None," Krath said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "This was a good life. The best," Owen agreed. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the valley in gold, and when they finally rose to descend back to the community they had helped build, they did so together, as they had always done, sharing the burden, sharing the joy, walking the path of their life side by side until the very end. And the community they left behind, the family they had raised, the love they had modeled, continued on, a living testament to what was possible when two people chose compassion over hatred, partnership over isolation, and love over fear. The legend of the yoke lived on, inspiring generations to come, reminding them all that the simple choice to help carry another's burden could change not just one life but countless lives. Because that was the truth Krath and Owen had discovered, the truth they had lived. That love, real love, was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up, day after day, choosing your partner, sharing the weight of living, and building something together that neither could build alone. It was about carving a second yoke and walking together, every dawn, up whatever mountain life presented, until the journey ended and the burden could finally be set down, knowing it had been carried well and the path had been walked with honor, with love, and with the best companion imaginable. That was their legacy. That was their truth, and it was enough.